A new study shows definitively that conservative faculty and students on college campuses will face significant discrimination because of their beliefs. They could have just asked me. Universities respond by labeling definitive studies a form of white supremacy. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start with hatred on the left, as a new study finds a majority of academics not only support discriminating against conservatives, 75% say they wouldn't even share a meal with a colleague that has right-wing views. And as somebody who's been part of the industrial educational complex for 30 years now, I can tell you this is exactly correct. But it's even worse than this. So, when I got the job here teaching at UW Oshkosh, it was my 7th university job. People who have my worldview don't tend to stay put for very long in the same place. So when I got here in Wisconsin 12 years ago, I vowed to myself that I was not going to immediately start engaging in any kind of conservative activism. I'm just going to teach my classes, keep my heads down. I was still in the process of suing another university who fired me for my worldview. Actually won that case, by the way. So I figured I was going to take a low profile. But here's what happens. The kids, the students, they just get, they're amazed that they're actually hearing something they've never heard before. And so they go running to the other teachers. They're not trying to be mean. They're not trying to, out you. But they're just so baffled by, hey, I had the new guy's classes. He's saying all these really things that we've never heard before. It's kind of cool. And the teachers are like, oh, really? Tell me what he's saying in his classrooms. And within 1 month, I'm already outed. And the funny thing about these progressives is that it's exactly right. They don't want you around. On the other hand, they want you where they can see you so they can control you. So on the one hand, they don't want me to participate in anything. They don't put me on any serious committees in the department. I have lost 12 years, every single vote in the at the English department level I've lost. I've never won anything. And yet they still want you close enough, right, so they can keep an eye on you. It really is like working in an Orwellian, almost Soviet-like environment. So
now, having said that, I assume you've never had lunch with any of them.
There's one, Robert Feldman.
Oh.
And if you know Robert Feldman, he's a sweetheart of a guy.
He is a sweetheart.
He's
of a man.
Totally apolitical. He's all he likes to do is power walk. So he power walks everywhere, and he's about the only one that I have been more or less comfortable to actually sit down and have lunch with. And we talk about everything but academics. But it's a very hostile environment. And the these liberal professors, they're constantly telling you that institutions are all political. Which means, and they're railing against these corporate boardrooms that used to be conservative, that aren't anymore, right? They're in their socialist, quasi-Marxist way. They still hate big business, even though most big business is on their side now. But when it comes to their own institutions, they refuse to recognize that kind of bias. They have PhDs. So even though they're all liberal, they don't discriminate. It really is the hypocrisy that's hard to deal with.
Well, the PhD says it all. And so we have found a PhD on the good side who actually took a look at various surveys, 8 of them, just to try to understand what is actually happening at these college campuses. And it's coming out of England. At the University of London, a politics professor named Eric Kaufman decided he was going to take a look at these various surveys that have been done and find out what's actually happening to our professors, to our students who have these conservative viewpoints. And he found, just looking at 8 surveys and all the different answers that have come out, an enormous amount of information, including the one about eating alone. It's like the cheese stands alone, right? Anyway, so Kaufman analyzed these 8 surveys, and it was graduate-level professors and doctoral students. So these are supposed to be the people.
Future of academia.
The future, the ones who, are going to be in control someday.
And it won't surprise you that graduate students are even more liberal than their teachers.
Having been a grad student, it is disheartening, to say the least. So he took a look at these grad students and the professors, and the majority of whom said they would not oppose discriminating against their right-leaning peers in some form. 10% of the academics support just outright canceling or firing of conservative professors who expressed their views. The study adds a new dimension to recent stories of harassment and intimidation of conservative voices in academia. And we know conservatives have long been a minority in American universities, but only recently has so-called cancel culture led to a rise in what Kaufman calls the chilling effect of self-censorship. And you know this, again, firsthand experience.
Yeah, Kaufman told the Free Beacon that the discriminatory impact is huge for conservatives in academia, and even without punishment mechanisms, a blatant opposition to conservative beliefs creates powerful conformist pressures that make people keep their mouths shut. That's my big problem. I never could. I mean,
still can't.
You still can't, right?
Can't.
I mean, my life would have been a lot simpler if they would have found out who I was, because again, the kids they talk about how you teach, but rubbing the wound is what they can't stand, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that you have an actual life outside of the campus where you can do the kind of politics that they are allowed to do in their classrooms. That's what bothers me. I had to find this, right? I had to literally take a second job. I had to literally find places like this where I could have a voice that was honest, where I was around people who felt like I felt politically, who were in simpatico with me. But what they don't recognize at the university is they get to do their politics as part of the job. They get to bring their feminism, their Marxism, their environmentalism, their queer theory. They bring it right into the classroom. They make it part of the classroom, not even realizing that all of it's political activism, right?
And none of it is more apparent than in the ramping up of any given national election over here. According to the study, let's talk about some data, even though we know math is racist. We're going to still talk about how 70% of conservative academics reported that they faced a hostile work environment within their departments. You're part of that 70%. 90% of those who supported former President Trump said that they were very wary of discussing political, like their beliefs or anything with colleagues. And, I mean, we saw this going back 2014, 15, I guess 2015 is probably when it really started up, but it just got worse and worse every single year on the college campus that you've seen it just
They actually believe if you voted for Donald Trump or support Donald Trump, you are a subversive revolutionary who should be hanged. It's funny that we've had 40 years of progressive treason in this country. Remember when Bernie Sanders honeymooned in the Soviet Union?
I don't, because he's so old, but yes, I know the story.
But there was no demeanor. It didn't hurt his political life at all. When Ted Kennedy was flying over during the Reagan administration to actually negotiate with the Soviets behind the back of Reagan, it didn't cost them anything. Now, one little riot at the Capitol, of which we have many people we know weren't even conservatives as part of that riot, and now they're all about treason again. The word treason and the word insurrection and the word hanging and capital punishment has the Democrat. If it took what happened on January 6th to get the Democrats to be aware of sedition again, I say it was worth it.
Well, okay, we'll see on that one. But 1 in 5, 20% of the academics who are under the age of 30, so we're probably talking the doctoral students at this point, said they support dismissing their peers deemed controversial. What does that even mean?
Not liberal.
What exactly? So deemed controversial to them could be the slightest disagreement. Slightest. I don't agree.
You're right.
Dismiss.
Look, there are way more what we used to call old-fashioned liberals in colleges than there are conservatives. What we would used to call Southern blue dog Democrats.
I'm going to go ahead and say I would love for half the campus to be liberal, not leftist. Right. That's the distinction. Liberal, and the other half to be conservative.
They're a dying breed. I mean, the traditional liberal used to be all about protecting our borders, used to be all
actually cared about our rights.
The ACLU, they used to be all about defending First Amendment. That's gone completely left now. And what's happening is there's so few conservatives that those moderate liberals, those Democrats who aren't just radical, they're the ones who are getting pressured even more than conservatives. For every one of me, there's 10 old-fashioned liberals who don't quite understand how progressivism got out of whack, and they're the ones now. And this is what happens when you have an ideological monolith on a college, anywhere, but especially on a college campus. The progressives are so used to being surrounded by people who only believe what they believe, radical left-wing ideology, that when they meet somebody, even a Democrat who loves their country, who wants the borders protected, who votes strictly Democrat, they don't understand that person. They see that person as extremely right-wing. Somebody like me, who actually votes for Donald Trump and doesn't apologize for it, they have no way of processing that.
So the moral of this story is that this cheese stands alone. Shockingly, but not shockingly at all, we have a teacher at a high school giving out yet another dumb assignment or asking another dumb question and getting themselves in trouble. This time, the teacher is from Porter Ridge High School in Indian Trail, North Carolina, and gave out a little assignment saying, hey kids, list your political party. Now, why you would ever ask this of any teenager, I don't know, but there it is in the PowerPoint in an awful font with awful coloring in the background like it's 1994 again. And of course, the question is, if you had to pick, ... are you a Democrat or Republican? 3 question marks. Why? Question mark. 2 to 3 sentences. Clearly not an English teacher, nor he's apparently a civics teacher.
And, when I went to school, that would not have been a controversial question. Back in the 70s.
Well, it would have been written properly, I would hope.
It would have been grammatically correct.
Outside of
right?
that,
Before
yes.
we decided that grammar was white supremacy, it would have actually... But that's in a civics and a history class, that's not a terrible question.
Well, you would have had civil debate
there would have
about
been balance,
it,
right?
Back and forth.
There would have been balance,
right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Would they have caricatured the Republican Party's position? Probably a little bit, but it would have been more or less balanced. Now, this is a dangerous question. What you're doing is you're trolling. You're literally trolling to see who you catch. And it worked.
Yeah, so what happened is the teacher, who we don't know the name of the teacher, then posted the entire class's choices and their reasoning that they put, their
to
why.
The internet.
No, on the board.
Oh, on the board.
And can you believe it? The kids had cell phones and could take pictures.
They put it on the internet.
No. Then they sent all the pictures around to their various friends.
Which happened to end up on the internet?
Anywho, one mother whose child was basically outed as being a Republican basically described what happened to her daughter, and she talked to the news about it.
It started with this question in her daughter's civics and economics class. If you had to pick, are you a Democrat or Republican? Why?
That's private. It is none of anybody else's business.
Her daughter answered Republican.
It turned out that the teacher posted all of the answers on the board with the students' names and then proceeded to read out the Republican kids' answers.
It didn't take long for the answers to spread through the school, and soon she says her child was bullied and threatened.
That teacher put a target. He outed these children.
Union County Public Schools says they're aware of the parents' concerns, noting the discussion was part of a civics and economics class in which students are learning about political parties. School administrators have addressed this matter with teachers, and they will continue to have conversations about best practices for instruction.
I love the newscaster there, the announcer, who says her daughter identified as Republican. Where was the dun dun dun? Was this that voice? And the idea that outed, right? So literally we have a situation now, and I got to stop saying the word literally. Remind me about that. We have a situation now where to be a Republican, even in a middle school or a high school, is like being closeted. It's the kind of thing that you should literally hide in the closet shamefaced, and only be dragged out at the time of your choosing. We now have the celebration of homosexuality, homosexual marriage, transgender for 5-year-olds. We have coming out parties, literally coming out of the closet parties for 5-year-olds who want to change their gender in kindergarten. But to be a Republican in a public school already places you deep in a dark closet.
There are 2 literalities you added in there.
2.
But the mother of the daughter said that given the climate now, people are too politically charged up. And she said it's just creating a toxic environment. And as she said in that clip, that teacher put a target. He outed these children. Most of us know that not even adults, and we do know this, can get along about this. I don't know why we would think that teenagers would be more mature about this than we are. And Mom, I guess your naivete on this one. We treat children like they're adults and adults like they're children. That's what it's just interchangeable at this point, and that's why.
The problem is that when it comes to left-wing issues, we treat children like adults. They want to lower the voting age for federal elections to 16. They want to give hormone blockers to 8-year-olds, right?
Yes.
When it comes to left-wing favored positions, children are adults. When it comes to right-wing issues, like gun ownership, they should never allowed to be owned gun, or maybe we push it back to 21 or push it back older. When it comes to right-wing issues, right, they're treated like like adults, children, excuse me. And this is how the left wins every time. We go along with this, right? We follow into these patterns. And the thing that the teacher did that nobody made a big deal about, the one thing the teacher did that really was off the charts wrong, is he only read aloud to the class the Republican kids. He singled out the Republicans. I'll bet you there were only a few of them, and read only the Republican kids' reasons for being Republican to the classes. And I would love to have seen the look on his face when he read them. How he read them. I'll bet you. And of course, as always happens in the public schools, we never know who the teacher is. We're not allowed to hear about the discipline if any's offered. This is a personnel issue. We can't talk about it.
Well, I was going to give the school response.
Go ahead.
They didn't give an actual, fun, full response like some of the schools do, but they did confirm that the assignment had actually happened. And they spoke with the students about, respecting each other's opinions, because that's what you're supposed to do. But they would not say if any action had been taken against
why would you respect
John Doe?
Why would you respect the kid sitting next to you's political views if the teachers don't respect
Yes, but most importantly, they do believe, the school does believe that, politics needs to be kept in the curriculum.
It's there. It's just all leftist politics.
Living in America, sometimes we hear about invasive species, depending on where you live. But now, in 2021, if you're human and your melanin is kind of, lighter, as in white, you're an invasive species. That's what we're learning. And this is coming out of American University, which is in D.C. I was going to go there for grad school. Thank God I didn't. They had a student senator who decided, you know what? She needs to write about whites being an invasive species in the student newspaper. And she knows everything because she's a freshman. Her name is Kayla Kelly, and she wrote in The Eagle in her article titled, "Mid-Semester Residential Experience Could Enforce Settler Colonialism. The influx," there's a colon there, "the influx of financially affluent white students entering D.C. could dilute its chocolate city."
Chocolate city status, yeah.
Anyway, so Kayla, basically what she's got her undies in a bunch about is the fact that mid-semester now, with Corona and everything that's been happening, they're going to allow for students to come back on campus. And so it's like a half semester on campus, and students have to pay for their housing and, the whatnot, all the stuff that goes on it. And there are 1,250 full-time students who were invited back for temporary housing. But here's her argument. If any of those students essentially come back, the white ones at least, they are being an invasive species because that's making it toxic there in the chocolate city.
So in other words, Washington is such a black city that the only real influx of white people is on the expensive college campuses. I'd like to ask Kayla, who does she think is paying for the little black girl scholarship she got to go to college? Whose tuition do you think is covering that?
I don't know what scholarship she did or did not get.
Wouldn't it be the invasive white dudes?
I don't know what scholarship she got. But she says settler colonialism is a form of colonialism that replaces the original population with a new invasive species. The settler system takes over the space, resources, and culture of the environment it encompasses, displacing the original populations. Why, thank you. She's mad, basically, that the students will, quote, buy out stock at stores and malls. And, of course, that then limits the resources for black communities. But she hasn't heard of this thing called the Amazon.
She also apparently doesn't realize this is the capital of the United States, that you're going to have people come in for all sorts of reasons. By that argument, could you call the entire UN complex invasive? I think so. They get to park wherever they want to park. They don't have to pay their parking bills. They have their own little embassies, right? They can squirrel away American girls onto the sex trade, send them out of places like Saudi Arabia, and no one can do anything about it. They can murder journalists, right, and get away with it.
Yeah, there's more. Kayla has more to say, though.
But before we go, one more sarcastic question to ask, if I may.
No.
We've now reached the point in this country where millions of Hispanics from the south of the border are invading this country, but you can't call it invasion because it's racist. Yet, a bunch of white college kids going from places like Baltimore and Andover and Virginia Falls, they're going to American University, and that's an invasion of black spaces.
Yeah, so here's her next part is she's going to yell about the guardsmen, the National Guardsmen who came in to protect the Capitol.
Who, by the way, were starved to death?
Yes.
And then poisoned?
That's not mentioned in this part.
Just asking.
But what she does mention is that there's a large unhoused population in D.C. that is directly affected by large presences entering into the city. For instance, when 5,000 National Guardsmen were deployed to the nation's capital to prepare for the presidential inauguration, many who weren't tested, she's talking about the COVID, it brought an increase of 200 new cases. So 5,000 guardsmen. She's the scientist on this, like Dr. Fauci, and says that clearly from that 5,000, 200 new cases, it directly links.
How wonderfully Hitlerian this is, right? This invasive species of white people carries disease. Did she compare them to rats too?
I do not see rats mentioned.
Well, we got to get her game up a little bit. I'll go one step further, too. The thing that bothers me about this whole thing is the National Guardsmen are there. Why? Who brought them? That would be the radical left. Who's mistreated them? That would be the radical left. Who said that they were too white and therefore might support insurrection? Did I say an erection? Insurrection. That they might support insurrection. That was the left. Who now keeps them there as a protective warning to Americans about their own liberties? Who's keeping them there now for no good reason? That would be the left. What party did Kayla vote for in the election? You're going to say, I don't know. I'll tell you who they voted for.
I'm going to say she's barely 18. Did she even know what was going on?
No, of course she didn't. But it's the very party that has run D.C. for 50 years and run it into the ground.
Well, it's time for some real education, and we know that this week has all been about Billy Shakespeare, and what some of the world's heavy hitters have been saying about Mr. William Shakespeare. And today we're going to look at what Samuel Johnson has to say about the Bard.
Yeah, this is an answer to Seuss Week we did last week. As the country is busily de-Seussing itself, its libraries are de-Seussing. The Seuss estate is actually de-Seussing Seuss themselves, because one study done by the Southern Poverty Law Center basically said that there aren't that many human characters in Seuss. They're almost created monsters and fantastical characters. But the very few characters there are were of ambiguous race and could be accused of being mostly white. For no other actual racism, simply because of the color of the skin of some of Dr. Seuss's characters. Seuss now is on the outs. Shakespeare, the week before we heard, was being replaced in high schools around the country because he was too white and too, quote, misogynist and classicist, right? He wrote a lot about kings, and so therefore he's not democratic enough for today's audiences. So what I decided to do was, let's just look for this week, each 5 days, at what some of the great thinkers in human history have had to say about Shakespeare. And now we have Sam Johnson, who is one of the great 18th century, one of the world's great critics, period, one of the great towering figures of letters in Western culture, world culture, actually. And what did Sam Johnson have to say about Shakespeare after 200 years of having his prominence displayed in English? He wrote, "Shakespeare is above all writers, at least above all modern writers, the poet of nature, the poet that holds up to his readers a faithful mirror of manners and of life. His characters are not modified by the customs of particular places. In other words, they are universal, unpracticed by the rest of the world, by the peculiarities of studies and professions, which can operate but upon small numbers. No, Shakespeare is big. Shakespeare, as Mr. Johnson is saying, transcends race and class and gender in an era that you, our progressive friends, call terribly patriarchal. Shakespeare gave us Lady Macbeth and Cleopatra and Rosalind, some of the great female cultural history, literary giants in history. He also says that Shakespeare was not susceptible to the accidents of transient fashions or temporary opinions. He was universal. They are the genuine progeny of common humanity, his works. The genuine progeny, the children of our common human experiences in his plays, such as the world will always supply and observation will always find. His persons act and speak by the influence of those general passions and principles by which all minds are agitated and the whole system of life is continued in motion. In the writings of other poets, a character is too often an individual. In those of Shakespeare, it is commonly a species. And that's the guy we got to get rid of for Sandra Cisneros, right? Whose only qualification to be a great writer is that she's not white.
Well, all right. If you're a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support our lovely little Patriot Club. And we're going to send you our signature tumbler as just that small token of thanks and gratitude. All you have to do to sign up is visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. And just a quick reminder to please, with a cherry on top, download our brand new Freedom Project Media app. All you have to do is simply search Freedom Project on your smart device, and once you download it, then allow for notifications.
Methinks thou should getteth this tumbler. And that's going to do it for this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie. Until next time, keep your erections and your insurrection separate, and stay educated, my friends.